out to talk about table grape cultivar selection and also some of the information on cultural management. And George, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself now and let you take it from here. Please, everybody, just type your chat questions in. I'll keep an eye on them, and I'll interrupt George periodically just to make sure that we get those questions answered for you. So thanks a lot, George.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is kind of interesting trying to do it through a computer. I'm one that always loves to read the audience and be able to work and talk looking and reading the audience. So if you do have a question, make sure you put it on the chat box and Laura will get it to me. So today we're going to be talking about table grapes, and very first off, so that everybody knows where I'm from, I'm here in New Hampshire, in the southern part. In New Hampshire, we call this the banana belt. About that star is right where I'm sitting today. You can see the university is more over to the ocean with the red dot. Anyways, is it harvest time? You know, sitting at a cold day, it was 10 degrees here. Boy, I wish I could be picking those grapes and eating them now. This is part of the project that we had been working on in the last 5 years. So, you know, today we're going to be talking about the cultivar selection, some aspects of planning, trellis construction, selection, and also talking about the aspect of the management or the grape calendar, looking at the different management considerations that you would have to do during the year. So before I really get into the varieties, you know, local grown seedless table grapes, what's important to know? It's really important that we know what the customer wants, look at the flavor that they want, know your market. Are you looking at pick your own farmers market, farm stands, or are you looking to be wholesaling? And you want to also match the variety or cultivar that you're selecting to the growing conditions. And especially here in New Hampshire, we had to look at the hardiness and make sure that we selected varieties that could take our winter conditions. Controlling pests, which includes weed, diseases, and insects. I should also put in vertebrate control. Turkeys love grapes and also the deer, and we had to do some putting up a deer fence to keep them out of our table grape project. Also, there are some special vineyard practices that if we're raising them for wine or juice production that we really don't think about, such as cluster berry thinning, looking at the size of the berry, looking at leaf removal. And also when we're looking at the harvesting, we have to handle that a different way than we would for any of the juice or wine grapes. The look of that bunch of grapes is critical for the marketing and selling. So we have to consider all these before we take that next step on looking at a variety. And when we're choosing varieties, we are going to be looking at the hardiness, disease susceptibility. Bricks, I'm talking about the sweetness. We're looking at flavor. People want white or red or purple, blue type grapes. The one that we were looking at, the seeded versus seedless. There seems to be more people wanting seedless varieties here in the New England region, and we were looking at the varieties that are seedless to see what would really grow well here. The presence of bloom, the intended use, is it just only for table grapes, or sometimes people want a variety that could be used maybe as a juice too. Slip skin versus cling. The slip skin is you take the grape and you smash it in your finger, and does the middle come flying out, or when you smash it, does the flesh and skin stay together? Acidity will reflect on flavor, and also looking at the aspect of your brick or your sweetness to acid also is important that we look at that for the more of the flavor aspect of it. Looking at seeded varieties, the white ones that have done well here in New Hampshire and New England is the Niagara. Some people like the foxy, vibrant flavor of it. Edelweiss is one that we can grow in the southern part of the state, and Seneca. There are several other varieties that are here, but I know in colder conditions that usually these are the three white varieties that will do well. If I look at the red ones, Delaware is an excellent for several different uses, not only for dessert or table grape, but also people will use it for wine and juice. Swinson Red from the Minnesota series is also a nice, pleasant flavor that ripens well. Some people will have Catawba. For us here in New Hampshire, in the northern part of New England, it ripens so late that it really doesn't fit our growing conditions well. When we come to the blues, there's a whole series of them, Concord being the #1 seeded blue grape, but there are several different sports, or what I could consider as Concord-like. Fredonia is usually a week to 2 weeks earlier than Concord. Valiant, Buffalo, Eldon, and Steuben are all very good. Some will ripen early versus later. And we use Concord as our base. If we say earlier, that means earlier than Concord. Well, 6 years ago now, we started a seedless table grapes here in New Hampshire. It was at Maplegate Farm in Merrimack. We received a SARE grant, and also the New England Vegetable and Berry Growers gave us a research grant, and that in order to do this research. Well, the question we had was growers and farmers were looking at what agricultural crops that are new and exciting that could expand their marketing opportunities. We went down through all the different seedless varieties, talking to nurseries and other growers, and came up with 16 different varieties that we want to look at how they would produce and adapt to our growing conditions in southern New Hampshire. And we selected, so right here is where Merrimack is in relationship in New Hampshire. Here an overview, and you can see the rows of grapes from Google Earth. And if I blow that up, the yellow boxes, we had one variety of each of the varieties, so you could walk down through. And the whiter box area was a half a row of each variety. There was 9 grapes, vines of each variety, half a row. And we did basically a 5-year comparison of how they grew, how they overwintered. So these were the varieties that we selected. I have 2 slides of each one describing the variety and another one showing the actual grape. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the written aspects. You can go back through and review this at a later time, but real quickly like to go through and so that you can see these seedless grapes, and at the end I'll tell you the ones that were the favorites. I have to say right off the bat, customer acceptance, they all sold. There was nothing that was really a dog that people didn't like. They loved the local grown seedless grapes, so we could sell anything that we grew, and we were getting a pretty good price. Wholesale, we were looking at $2 a pound, sold to different markets, and we were seeing the stands selling them from $4 to $5 a pound on a retail to the customer basis. So the first one was Canadice, nice compact berries. It had a nice red appearance. You can see the grape bunches on the vine. This was around 2 weeks before we harvested them. And it was a real nice, a weaker growing vine, was not real prolific, standardly growing fast. We kind of had to baby it along. It seemed to take our winters. We did see some winter kill as we're going through the different years. Einset is a red grape, and I could not get it to grow here. So right off the bat, some of these vines were replanted 4 times, and every year it seemed like it winter killed in our conditions up here. So if a person asked me about Einset, I would say, geez, I think we should skip this one. It does not really adapt to our colder temperatures. And I have to tell you that last winter we got down to 15 below at this site. In previous winters, we had several years that were 8 to 15 below on other years. So it seemed to winter kill, or did winter kill for us at our site. Reliant was one of the best producing one. Really grew well for us, very aggressive grower, had to do a lot of shoot thinning and also pruning during the summer months. As you can see, the bunches on the screen here, they had a red color, but they also had a cream green to red. And I thought that might disappoint the customers, but they didn't seem to really care about the color. Once they were ripe, they sold. They flew off the shelf at the one farm stand where these were going to. Very productive, one of the most productive vines we had in the first 5 years. You can see them roped on. I have to say we did do a lot of leaf plucking or removal, or at the bottom left there, you can see what the vine would look like if we left the leaves on there. The grapes would not ripen as well. Somerset Seedless, wow, what a great tasting variety. I think it has a lot of potential. It is a weaker growing variety. This variety was planted a year later than all the other 15 varieties that there wasn't available when we first set out the vineyard. But I think it has a lot of potential. Again, it's going to take you a little bit longer to get this established. I'm looking to see how it overwinters here in the future, but eating-wise, it was, I thought, an excellent variety. Suffolk Red is another variety that we tried that really did not do well in our conditions. It died back. I only had one vine that lived more than 4 years. All the other ones kept dying back, and you can see that it was more of an open clustered type grape. This vine did winter kill last year, so we'd have had to replace all 10 of them. The grower has removed all the Suffolk Red. This is one that I would not be recommending in our conditions here in New Hampshire. Vanessa is another favorite of the reds, a real nice semi-compact but still not real tight variety. It was on the weaker side, but once it started to produce, it flew. Couldn't keep enough on the sales counters for the sales store. People really love the flavor of it. It has a lot of potential, a nice seedless red. Himrod is one of the whites. We had some problems with shattering and crackberries with Himrod. It did produce fair in the production. Again, you can see what it looked like. This is a variety that I would be looking at nutrient feeding at bloom, right prior to bloom, to see if we could increase fruit set to get better clusters. Interlaken is like a cousin to it. Again, very similar to Himrod, an early white. Is very similar to Himrod. Again, the clusters that we saw here in our conditions were weak, but I feel that it had a potential. You have to watch out at harvest time. The berries will crack in wet conditions, and so they may shatter off also. Lakemont, really the three of the whites that I just showed was my favorite. it seemed to have a little bit better cluster 2 out of the 5 years that we were looking at it. You can see it here growing, very good growth, average to good growth to the vines. Again, one that I think that has some possibilities. Of the white grapes, the Marquis was by far the most productive. Grape did very well in our trials for production, and there was a lot of acceptance in the market for this variety. You can see here I'm holding a cluster, nice long cluster, filled out well. However, the one downside, diseases were attracted to this. It seemed to come down with a couple different diseases, so your fungicide program must be right on to keep the vines clean. Going to our purple, Concord Seedless is a sport of Concord that the seeds don't develop. It comes in around a week to 2 weeks earlier than the normal Concord Seedless, so it would be considered a mid-season versus a mid-late for the regular Concord. You can see they were roped on, great production. We have a lot of people here in New England that likes the Concord. It was a good seller, and it was one of the later ripening varieties out of the 16 that we had, so it fit that later period to extend our seasons. Venora was a disappointment, very shaggy type clusters. It was probably the most disease prone of the blues that we grew. Again, it kept on winter killing on us. The grower has removed this. In a warmer site, this might be a variety to consider. However, we just couldn't get it to grow and produce year in and year out. Jupiter is one of the Arkansas series of a blue grape. These are still a little bit early. You can see them here, kind of an oval type grape. A lot of potential. Again, we saw some disease problems, so a good fungicide program is really important. The next one of the Arkansas series is Mars. Excellent growing grape. Tend to produce real heavy canes, so we could get into a bullwood. Think of it as wood that is larger than your thumb. I like to have pencil-sized diameter. A bullwood would not be as productive as the smaller canes. So we have to watch our fertility. We don't get it growing too aggressive, but look at the crop that's hanging there. A nice medium-sized cluster, a lot of acceptance in the marketplace. Tom Cord was my favorite of the blues. Just a gorgeous, it was like the third most productive variety that we grew in the trial. You can see them hanging down through, a very Concord looking, but it had a mild flavor, not the real strong Labrusca flavor as Concord. Definitely a variety that would recommend trying. I'm seeing this in supermarkets from California, so that advertising of this, California is pushing this variety, so that there might be more marketing avenues for this seedless grape. Vanessa is the third of the Arkansas series that we tried here. Very compact bunches, very musty flavor to it when it's not ripe. So you have to make sure this one gets ripe for the flavor to really develop well. So if I look at the seedless varieties, the Reliant is the red that was one that you should really consider growing. Marquis being the white variety that was the most productive. Going to the blues, blacks, Tom Cord, and Concord Seedless. Laura sent out a web connection for our research paper on these, and also I think she sent you a fact sheet that summarizes all the varieties. Well, if I'm going down which ones that were weak in our conditions, in a colder climate, Einstein and Suffolk Red, I would not be recommending. Candidice, Somerset Seedless, and Vanessa, all excellent eating qualities, something I would try, and I would be trying in your locale to see how they adapt. Again, they can be a little bit weaker, so it might take you a year longer to get them established in your vineyard. Glenora had some concerns about the susceptibility and potential producing that bullwood, and also the ability to harden off for winter. I'm not recommending it for growers here in our area. Mars, Vanessa, and Jupiter were fair in production. If they're not ripe, the flavor a little bit maybe mustier or different flavor to them. Of the three, Mars seemed to have more potential, but we have to watch out for that heavy producing shoots. The whites, Interlaken, Himrod, and Lake Mott are good growing varieties, the good flavor to them. We got to watch out for that shatterberry and cracking as they ripened, and also the disease susceptibility of them. Well, do-it-yourself grape variety trials. Test them yourself in your conditions. Talk to other growers. Trial new varieties. Plant 4 or 5 vines of each variety and see how they do in your area. What I saw here in New Hampshire might not be the same in New York, Pennsylvania, or Connecticut, or wherever you may be. So you want to make sure you see what they look like over a couple different seasons before you buy into them. And once you have a few, get your customers' feedback to see if they want them. What's new for us here in New Hampshire, in 15 we planted 8 of the varieties that we thought were the better ones for our conditions. We're looking at 3 different training systems to see which training system really will work better for the seedless table grapes, and I'll show you a little bit more of the 3 systems that we're trying. This project, we use the vertical shoot position.
George, can I
Yes.
just interrupt for just 2 seconds? I just want to make sure that people have, does anybody have any questions about those cultivars before we move fully into the training systems? I'm not seeing any chat questions, so, but go ahead. We'll still have time to answer those questions. Just chat them into the chat box, and I'll interrupt George again at the end of this section. Okay, George, thanks a lot. It sounds great.
So these are the varieties that we're going to be trying with the 3 different systems. Again, we're using the VSP, vertical shoot positioning. I have a diagram later on that will talk about it. But hopefully you can see the boxes of fruit. It was interesting with this trial. We had one store that would take everything that we produced, and they wanted them in these actually strawberry boxes, and then they would pack them at the store. And again, they were selling between $4 to $5 a pound, and they were flying off the storefront. So there was not one true favorite variety. Anything they had, they would be able to sell. So looking at varieties, final thoughts that I have. What is the customer demanding in your area? What dollars do you have to invest? This is not a cheap investment. It does cost a lot to get established. What cultivars and varieties really adapt well to your area, your climate, your site. And the big thing is there's a lot of time and labor to take care of table grapes. I can't overstate, it takes more time for these than it does for your wine grapes and your juice grapes. Growing Concords, my father managed over 200 acres when I was growing up. and they were a lot easier for juice, growing them and forgetting about them aspect, where these you were constantly doing leaf plucking, you're doing tucking and combing the vines to make sure that they were growing up in order to get those beautiful clusters that the consumer wants. Can't overestimate the dollars, the time, and the labor required. There was a real nice list developed by Kentucky Extension on your checklist in developing a vineyard. And there were these, and I'm not going to go down through, you can read them later, but I thought it was great to throw it up, go down through. When you're developing your vineyard, it's not just buy the vines and throw them in the ground and hope they will grow. You need to get the land ready, make sure that the soil is in the right pH, nutrient levels, make sure there's no problem with air drainage or cold water or cold weather situations, or even soil having too wet of soil. So go down through and through the checklist. It has a real good listing. And I thought we had followed this, but number 14, it says install deer fencing. Year 2, we had to do it at our site. This was in the middle of a hayfield. Never dreamed the deer would cause a problem, and boy, did they wipe out a couple of the varieties, eating the vines and shoots right off the vines. Then we had a problem with turkeys coming in. Once we had the fence up using a page wire type 8-foot high fence, we stopped that. So contact your local extension people to see what help they can provide and some ideas that they could provide you in making your decision. So here's another look of all the different varieties together, the blues, the reds, and the whites. The choice is yours, which direction you want to go with the seedless. Okay, Laura, do we have any questions yet before I go into planting?
Yes, we do. And we've got a question that is talking about marketing. She says, for the customer demand, do you think some of the customer enthusiasm was because of novelty value, like people trying them out, or do you think you're going to get good luck with repeat customers?
We were getting real good repeat with customers. With this project, again, people were asking the store that where we sold the grapes to, when would the table grapes be ready starting in June, when they wouldn't be ready until the end of August. So there were a lot of interest in it. I have another grower that goes to 10 farmers markets in the Massachusetts area. He has close to 150 vines, Canadice, Mars, and Marquis. He sells every single grape that he grows at $5 a pound at the farmer's market. He was taking usually 200 to 300 pounds per market, and they were flying off the shelf. It was one of the first things that were sold out at his farmer's market stand.
All right, great. George, we did send a cultivar fact sheet out yesterday. It was attached to the email, and did that have all the information that you had in this PowerPoint? That was another question. It
actually had more information on the sugars or the bricks, and also berry and cluster weights. Overall production, I had only 2 years on there. The grower was ill, and 1 year we couldn't get yield data from it. And then we had a person go in that was supposed to be picking from certain rows, and they picked 2 of our rows totally 1 year for juice, making jams, and they weren't supposed to take the table grapes. They were supposed to take the Concord grapes that were on the umbrella Niffin, but they quite the project out in 2016. So I don't have data from that. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. So maybe for those of you who are trying to keep track of this, if you print off that fact sheet and then listen to the recording of this webinar, that might help you fill in the gaps as far as varieties go. I've got one final question here, and then I'll let you move on. I'll answer this, but we're talking about who can this woman talk to about grapes. Okay. I will get back to her and you can keep going. Thanks.
Okay, the second area that Laura asked me to do was planting. And I'm going to go back over a couple things that were said last week. We want basically full sun. I look at the 10-hour rule as making sure we have 10 hours of sunlight to get the best production. I always get somebody says, well, grapes grow in the forest, but where do they grow? They climb to the top of the trees for the sunlight. So if we have a shady area, they're not going to do as well. They're not going to be as productive. They're going to be more vegetative. A small amount of afternoon shade won't hurt, but I like to have that full sun. A deep, well-drained, loose soil. Want to have good air circulation. Planting in early spring is what I recommend here in a colder climate. I don't recommend planting in the fall because of frost heaves during the winter months, especially in an open winter. And I have seen 75% of the vines on a 200 vine vineyard planted in the fall, losing those vines. So spring is where in colder climates that I would be recommending. So that full sunlight, good water drainage, and also air drainage. Remember, you can see on the chart on the right-hand side on that diagram, cold air flows down the hill and you can get the ponding or damming effect. So we want to make sure air can drain out of the vineyard, especially on our hillsides. So air drainage is critical. We also want to monitor the temperature. And if people say they're looking into the feasibility, I tell them to put in or set out a high-low thermometer for a winter or even after they plant, so you can monitor on a weekly basis what it is the high temperature versus low temperature, so you can plot it out and see what the conditions are. It gives you information that if you have died back for winter injury, you can see what those temperatures were. And a good high-low thermometer is $25, $30. And to me, it's a good investment that you can make for that given site. Space between vines, weaker type vines, we could maybe go down to 6 feet here in the north, 8 feet for more aggressive growing vines between rows. Now notice the guy mowing the lawn or the in between the rows here in the picture. I like to see at least 8 feet between rows in order to make your management easier. I hate to see people have to use a hand lawnmower, and also you don't realize the amount of shading from one row to the next row. So we need at least that 8 feet to get that distance so that we don't get the shading aspect. So if we were going 8 by 12, we're going to be looking at 450 vines. 8 by 8 is 640 or thereabouts vines per acre. You also can be looking at using a arbor like I have on the left bottom there, but instead of having your cordons in your older part of the vine going through the middle, I tell people keep those cordons in the older, thicker portion on the outside and have all your new growth going in across your Grape our overhead arbor. That way, the strength of arbor, it's going to be stronger on the outside edge where the posts are supporting those poles. So it's just kind of a little tidbit that I could add on. I've seen a lot of arbors go down because of the weight of the grapes. So try that, and I think you'll have a better success in growing grapes on a overhead arbor. I like to see rows going north and south to maximize the sunlight. But, you know, what is your slope, your winds, and other factors? You may have to go east-west. So it's not a hard rule to go by, but if you have that ability to go north-south, that's the direction I would be recommending. You're going to be getting a grape nutrient talk next week, but soil testing, finding out what your pH and micronutrients are critical, and you need to do this the year prior to. I can't overemphasize trying to get your pH and nutrient levels in the right range prior to planting is a lot easier versus once the vines plant it. It's a lot harder. So the year before, we want to decide on the varieties that you want to plant, order the vines. Some of these varieties might be 2 years before you can get them. Soil test, adjust your pH, nutrients. Want to kill any perennial weeds. Some people might use a light fabric plastic to do that, or other people may use tillage or to kill it, or a herbicide. So planting a cover crop the year before can help build organic matter. It also can reduce some of the weed problems. I have examples of different types of cover crops. Some people might leave it fallow until every 2 to 3 weeks to reduce your weed population. Here's what we did at the trial that we did in New Hampshire. It was a real nice grassy area. The pH was 6, so we didn't have to really do much liming. Nutrient levels were all right, especially phosphorus. Potassium was a little bit low, so we did the weed killer for the rows, down the rows. Then we went through and tilled the different strips up the fall prior to it, retilled in the spring, and did the planting the next year. Some people were going to do the whole area, till it, spread the lime fertilizer, get the whole area, then go into the actual planting in the spring. We want to make sure we purchase the varieties from a reputable nursery so we know what we have. Vigorous 1-year-old plants are the best. Small, weaker 1-year-olds are often held over by the nursery and then sold as 2-year-old. If they're good, strong 2-year-olds, I have no problem. Making sure that they're virus-free if possible. Grafting is a debate unto itself. I'm not going to really get into the grafting at this point. If you have soil problems, low temperatures, where vines are dying at the ground level, it might be an alternative that you should look at. We like to soak the roots for an hour or 2 to 3 hours prior to planting. You can see that we were using a 12-inch auger making the holes. The person then went back through, scored the sides so to make sure that it was not glazed around the edge so the roots could penetrate that hole. We backfilled. You can see the person watering it in, making sure that they were planted to the level that they were in the nursery. So each hole, dug the hole 12-inch by 12-inch, backfilled with topsoil. We might put in some organic matter into it at that time. If the roots were broken, we might basically tip off the broken one, set it in the hole, and the holes, spread them out, cover it with 6 inches, tamp down, then backfill, and we didn't tamp that down so that it was right at the original line in the nursery. After planting, we pruned back to 2 to 5 buds. A lot of places will say 2 buds. We usually left 1 or 2 canes, shoots, or spurs per vine. It was a dry summer. In 2010, we were watering equivalent 1.5 inches per week through the summer by hand. They didn't have the ability to do drip irrigation at this site where we did the project at. We use stakes and strings to train the shoots up, or you can see the blue grow tubes. They're really neat. They really aid in growing them out. Some people like them, however, there's other people that don't. I like it, defined it, and got them growing straight up. It really made a difference in training later on. Late summer, we remove them because it heats them up and they don't harden off properly. And also, if you leave them on there, it becomes a place for mouse damage or vole damage. Mulch increases moisture, decreases weeds. Keep an eye for even moisture around it. People will use wood chips, bark, or plastic. However, in our area here, voles can be a problem, and we were seeing quite a bit of damage because of using an organic mulch. So really, I haven't pushed using mulches that much in our area because of the vole problems that we have here in New Hampshire. First couple of years, we don't want them to fruit. We take off the fruits so the roots will develop, get a better vine growing. Remember, pruning is really important, and pruning to a training system is critical. We just don't want the vines to grow rampant or wherever they want to go, because you're going to delay fruiting in the future if you don't start training those vines early. You don't leave children go wherever they want. You train them when they're young, so as they get older, they do what you want to do as a parent. We want to do the same as our grapevine. And the other aspect that I see is people are afraid to remove and prune the young vines. They want to leave 90%, but I'm going to be usually removing 80–90% of the vine, the previous year's growth, to ensure a higher quality vine in the future. And remember, we don't prune, we're not going to have more grapes. They're not going to produce the amount that you want. First year, after planting, cut back to 2 canes, 2 to 5 buds. Make sure that they're fastened. We usually don't fertilize unless we have a problem. If we're going to fertilize, maybe a little bit of compost and backfilling. We fertilize lightly the second year to the growth of the plants. If they're weaker, we might give them a little bit more. Usually we like to do it at bud break, and maybe another dose near around 4 weeks, 5 weeks after that. Never fertilize after the 4th of July in our conditions up here in New Hampshire. Second year, remember you're training and pruning to a system, so you want to make sure you're selecting the canes according to the system we're going. We might leave 5 buds. I do like a double stock system, so that we do have winter kill, we might be able to have one survive the winter and maybe one stock not, so we are not starting from the ground each year. More vigorous vines, we can leave 8 to 10 buds for those 2 canes. Second year, again, we're going to remove the flower clusters as they form, so that we're filling out the vine and getting the vine to the size and what we want. The other aspect is establishing your row middle, establishing a sod in between. You can do it the fall prior to planting. It eases planting activities. However, it may compete against the vines, so that we want to make sure we do a good job of weeding and keeping the grass back away from those vines. If we do it the fall after, there's no competition, but we got to control the weeds. Usually the grass will take better in a fall planting than they do in a spring planting. Spring plantings, you also have more weed competition with your summer annual type weeds. We're recommending a slow growing type of grass. Hard fescue or bluegrass mixture will work real well in this. So that's my quick overview of planting grapes. Laura, do we have any questions?
Yes, George, we do have one question about retraining older vines. Linda says that they have very overgrown vines and wants to fix it. What should she do?
Come to my pruning demonstration the first Friday of April, and I can go over it.
Yeah, and Linda, I don't know where you are, but that is a good point, that going to a pruning demonstration is really helpful. But I'll mute myself so I won't go on about it.
All right. Depending on how far they're grown, if you have a shoot from last year, you can take that shoot that grew last year and plant it right where it is, and it's called a dipper or layering method, and you can start a vine that way so that it's growing where you want it, and you then can train it however you want. The other aspect is if you have any shoots coming from the ground near the stalk of a really overgrown, cut it back to those new shoots closer to the ground and then train it the way you want it. It's going to grow like the dickens because it has that great root system. But if you try to keep going out further and further, you got to renew it back to that ground or near ground level to get the stalk and get it growing. So that's, without seeing it, it's hard to explain. That's the best I can say.
Yeah, and I've got a couple people asking me where the pruning demo is. George's pruning demo is in New Hampshire. We don't have any grape pruning demos scheduled at this point in Eastern New York, to my knowledge anyway, but I will certainly keep you posted. Oh, Jim O'Connell says we do. February 21st in the Hudson Valley. And Jim, that particular one is for wine grapes, is it not? Yep, wine grapes. So we'll keep you posted, though. We'll let you know about these other opportunities. And I've got one other quick question. I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it. We have a student asking if she can plant new vines where she has removed other vines. And so she's kind of taking new vines, putting them in an older vineyard where she's removed old vines that have been there for about 4 to 5 years. And she's wondering if she can do that without doing anything special to the soil.
Without knowing what the pH and nutrient levels are, I really can't answer. Why did you want to take out the vines? If it was they were dying back, then I would have some concern. There could be some nematode problems depending on where you are. The sandier the soil, for the further south you are, further north, usually it isn't a problem. Many times we'll have a vine that dies back in the vineyard, and yes, we do replace them. So yes, you can do it. However, why did those vines that you're trying to replace, what happened to them? So you answer a question and ask 4 more questions. I'm sorry, but it's hard to
that's
decide.
Great. That's great. Okay, I'll let you keep going, and I'll try to answer a few of these, things from these other folks. Thank you, George.
All right, trellis systems. It's the artificial support, and right off the bat, if you have several different varieties, label your rows so that you know what variety is what. To me, that's really key. You can see the Vanessa, that row 6, right there it was. There are several different types of systems, and they can go from a very simple to more complex according to the viticultural situation you're doing. Vigorous vines with lots of growth benefit from a more complex trellis, Geneva double curtain, for example. Where low vigor vines that not enough growth to fill a large trellis, keep a simpler system. So, your vineyard vigors related to the yield is really important. I really can't answer the type of trellis unless we talk about some of the systems. And when we talk about systems, we're talking about how we're pruning. Pruning is the removal of the plant. We're controlling the size. We're forming the grapevine. We're optimizing our production potential, and we're trying to maintain a balance between the growth and the fruiting of the vine. So you can see the top vine is not pruned, where we got the bottom one pruned. I need to put a white sheet behind it, I know, but the only pictures I could really find that could show it. Sorry about the quality going from that. So training is now the arranging of the plant parts, and so it's not necessarily the removal. So we're trying to develop the structure. So we're optimizing the sunlight and promotes more productive. We're looking to adapt our training to the characteristics, how they're growing. Is it an upright grower? Is it a trailing type of growth patterns? We promote efficiency and sustainability of the practices by training it, and is it more economic to establish and maintain? So you can see the vines in the picture, they had been trained through the growing season, and later on I'll talk about some of those methods of training during the growing season. Now with pruning, there's two types. There's the long cane method, which we're going 8 to 10 buds or maybe longer. This is an example of the VSP cane method. Or we can have spur pruning, where we're leaving 2 to 5 bud long spurs that is the fruiting wood for the following year. So the trellis that we are designing and going to be putting in is going to depend on this. Is it a cane versus spur? What type of training system we're going will dictate it. So there's a whole bunch of different type trellis systems. I have 5 or 6 examples of training systems and trellis systems that we have, that you can have right here, but there's a lot more, from the Geneva double curtain on the left to a forearm niffin to the vertical shoot positioning or low cordon or cane system in the middle, to Geneva double to the umbrella niffin, to a high cordon, to a V style. So the trellis that we're going to be developing and putting in is going to be dependent on the training system that we are going to. Now for table grapes, in our trials at UNH at campus, we're going to these 3 systems. I've mentioned the VSP, the vertical shoot position, which we went with a canes type approach, where we lay the canes out on a lower variety, and as the shoots grew, we train them between catch wires up. We're going to use the top wire cordon, a spur system, where we're going to be running a cordon with those fruiting spurs 2 to 5 inch along the top wire, and those varieties that are trailing would grow well this way. And then we're going to comb the shoots during the growing season, so they're going downward. Now the other method is one that I knew very little until growing table grapes, is what we call a modified Munson system, where we're going to go with a cane system, 4 canes per vine growing out, and as the shoots grow, we're going to train them to a wire that is around 12 inches out from the middle 2 wires, and train them to that so that the grape clusters will hang down. This wire will be around 5 foot above ground. And will be a 4-wire system on top, with another wire around 30 to 36 inches off the ground as a training aid to get the vines up. So we're going to see the time requirements, and is there any difference in production and the difference in marketability. You're using these different systems to see what will grow the best in our system. So again, we develop and build the trellis according to our training system. I can talk a little bit more that we like to make sure we raise the crop and vine for easy care. We were also training to this trellis to get the best light exposure to the crop and also to the vine to increase those bricks with the fruit and get better color to it. I did have another informational sheet that Laura sent out from New Mexico. I thought was excellent in building a trellis. Some of the pictures I have here are from that, where this is a H system for your end post. It's where I'm recommending growers go to versus an anchor system. It seems to be stronger. It's more costly, I'll admit, but we don't get the sagging and our wires stay tighter using this type of brace system at the end, and what we call an H brace. The second one I have is an anchor. Notice it's a 25 to 40 degree, I think that's around 30-degree angle back towards the anchor. Is important in order to keep the tension on your wires. If it's straight up, they'll tend to loosen more, and you have to make sure you have a good anchor system, and you can buy these screw anchors around $12 a piece up here, but if you're in a stony area, they can be difficult to put in. It's one of the reasons we're going to the anchor system. So if you have your end posts upright in this, and then you start to put force on those wires, you're going to actually be pulling it out. We need to have that 30-degree, 25, 30-degree angle towards your anchor to keep the tension, and also for support to keep the tension on the wire. So I can't reiterate how important that is with your anchor system. Putting in the stakes, you can do a post pounder, like the picture on the right here where he's pounding it in, or on the picture on the left, those stakes were auger in. They are a little bit higher than the 6 foot. We were going with 12 foot because this vineyard was designed so that we could put bird netting over the top. So the person went to the extra cost to get the height so that they'll be able to run their tractor down the road and be able to spray during the year instead of having individual netting on each row that's going to be over the top. So the problem between your digging the holes versus pounding, digging disrupts the soil in a bigger area where you'll tend to see more heaving with a post hole dug post. Where we pound, we're driving it in, we usually see less heaving of those stakes, and they stay in place much better, and the stability is better with the post-pounded stakes. So if possible, pounding them is recommended, but if you only have an auger and that's what you have to do, you may have to go back through and do a little bit of maintenance on the trellis each year. So usually we are looking at your 9-foot post with your end post being 4 to 5 inch in diameter. We like them in the ground 3 feet, angled at 25 to 40 degree towards your anchor, and anchor with a wire. Usually every 24 feet we have a post, again 9-footer, and usually 3 to 4 inch, so you can use a smaller one. Attach your wires. The number and position depends on the training system you're using. If we're using a VSP, we want 2-sided. The heights of the wire, 30 to 34 inches. If my rows are going north and south, I'll have them the same height. If my rows are going east to west, the back side I'll have slightly higher, the 34 inches, and the front wire I'll have at 30, so we get better sunlight penetration into those young buds as they're starting to grow as shoots in the springtime. It will work better. But north and south, there you don't have as much shading problems. Then from there, every 12 to 16 inches, we have a set of catch wires so that we can train up. An umbrella nifant, we're going to have 2 wires, one at that 30 or 34 inches and one at 60 to 72 inches, top wire. We have a training wire at 30, 34, and another a bottom wire at 30 to 34 inches with your top wire being at 5 to 6 foot. Usually recommend number 9 gauge galvanized wire. Having your adjustable tension devices makes it easier to tighten the wires for each year. So that is a aspect to make your job easier, and I do recommend it for that ease. So that's kind of an overview of our trellis system. I think I'm pretty much right on, Laura. Do you have any questions?
Yes, you are. No, you're doing really well. And those folks that are asking about pruning demos, we're trying to get the information together. So we'll send that out to everybody about pruning demonstrations. But I don't have any questions, and I think you can just keep charging forward, George.
All right. I have to catch my breath here. The other one, you had 3 people talking, and
I know this was a lot. This was really all on your shoulders. So I wish I could be there to give you a glass of water or something, but you're doing beautifully.
Well, hopefully the participants feel that they're getting something out of it. I hope you are. Can't read your smiling faces. I'm sorry about that. This next one was a lot harder for me to put together because she wanted me to look at an overview of the vineyard management considerations. And I thought of all the different ways of doing it and all the different jobs. And I decided, geez, I'm going to look at a calendar of activities and management practices and go that means so that you can see what is taking place during the year. There can be a lot more items I could put in. I just try to give you a snapshot of things that you have to consider in management during the growing season. So we're looking at the grape calendar from the fall through that harvest, from the end of the season in the wintertime through spring at bud break, through growing the grapes to the actual marketing. So it's a big picture, 365 days that we have to plan each year what we're going to do when. That top left picture was me actually doing a pruning demonstration. Usually have 20 to 30 people each year attending the one that we had done at John Listoka's farm. There I was pruning that vine in an umbrella nifit for more of a homeowner situation. Okay, so starting out the year, they're dormant. We're going to read, attend meetings, network, learn more about grape growing, viticulture, review our disease, insect, weed management strategies, determine what supplies we have at hand, what do we need, including our pesticides, repair, check equipment, including your sprayers and your mowers. I'm real big on calibrating your sprayers, critical. This is a business for you, develop a budget. What are your goals and strategies for the coming year? I'm real big on setting goals. Plan a work schedule when you would like to have items done. Build your relationships with your buyers, if it's your individual customer or if it's a wholesaler. March, April. We're doing soil testing to make sure we have our nutrient needs in place, making any type of repairs to our trellis system. We're going to remove any old disease clusters that we missed in the fall cleanup because that becomes the inoculum for the disease the coming year. So go walk through, prune off any clusters or the remains of the rascum of the grape cluster off so that you're reducing that inoculum. You can start doing an evaluation of your winter injury And cane damage, any type of perennial weed or biennial weed, go ahead and get rid of it now. For new plantings, we're going to be receiving and handling the new plants and preparing the soil. We want to basically begin our pruning. Start with the hardiest varieties first. And we try to wait until it's as late as possible that we can get the job done before real growth starts, so that we can decide on how much winter damage we have. Many times I'll go through and block out, prune, leaving more buds on a vine. Then as they start to grow, I'll go back through and do my final pruning. Some people like to record how much growth was the previous year, and then we can determine the number of buds we're leaving based on the pruning weights. Also, we're going to check for disease and insect recommendation with our NUA weather stations throughout New England, especially New York. There's weather stations. You can go online. Laura can talk about this at maybe a later date, but it's an excellent resource, and they have models for insect and diseases. And Anna may be able to talk about it next week on the pests. I like to put down usually half of our nutrient recommendations at bud break, refer to our soil and tissue tests for how much we're putting down. Some of our pre-emergent herbicides, if we're using a herbicide, would be going down at this time, follow our label rates. If we have an irrigation system, we want to make sure that it's all ready for the coming growing season. And if we're going to be putting in new plants, I'm looking for the end of April, 1st of May, of getting them in the grapes up here. Further south, we can may plant a little bit earlier than that. May, we start to monitor our soil moisture levels, irrigate if necessary. We start scouting flea beetles, for example, berry grape moth. If it's a problem, we might want to put out traps to monitor for presence. Different diseases, we might want to have a lime sulfur spray on before bud swell or bud break, and start our fungicide system, or schedule, I should say, at this time. Start our shoot and cluster thinning in the late May into June. We might want to cultivate weeds out of new plantings, mow between rows, and again, check our insect and disease recommendations from our NOAA weather station. Getting into June, we're going to be looking at, again, irrigating, keeping our fungicide programs on at 1 to 3 inch growth at bloom time. What's your pre-harvest intervals for any of the fungicides? Record our bloom time for each variety. From year in to year out, you can determine how early or late you are by looking at that bloom time. It gives you an indication of when the crop's ready. Many times, midsummer, people say, well, when's my grapes going to be ready? And I ask, when did they bloom? Because each area can be slightly different. The other second half of your fertilizer goes on at bloom time. Bloom is also a time that we need to control for phylloxera, which can be a problem on some of our table grapes. Again, checking our insect and disease recommendations from our new weather stations across the Northeast here. New plantings, start pruning or training our grapevines right off as they grow. Remove any grape clusters that appear on those new vines. June, we start to remove suckers from the base of the plants, the vines. In late June, finish our shoot and cluster thinning, shoot positioning, vigorous vines, train them to the system that you're looking at. Keep our shoot spaced so that there's minimal overlapping of the leaves is really critical. Instead of having them grow in a bunch like you can see on that one vine on the right versus the other vines on the left on the other row were trained or combed, positioned a lot better. Continue our mowing and weeding in the row. For new plantings, that weed control is critical. Please don't be a person that you plant it and forget it. Take care of them. Weeding is critical for those young plants. The less competition, the better off they're going to grow. July comes, we continue our pest management program. Again, checking our pre-harvest interval of the pesticides we're using. Mow between the middles, irrigate, finish our shoot positioning. You may need to start to do shoot topping, which is on top, pruning it back to maybe to the top wire or 6 inches above the top wire, or shoot skirting is those trailing varieties that go down where it's keeping them off the ground, maybe a foot off the ground, and cutting them off. Leaf removal, or some people call it leaf plucking, base of shoots to open up the clusters to the sunlight so that they have a chance to breathe, to help increase color development and also reduce the amount of moisture in there for diseases. Again, checking our newest station for their recommendations. Continue training plants and controlling the weeds on those new plantings is critical during July. Okay, veraison is the starting of the ripening, or the changing of the color of the grape from the green to the color it's going to be. At that time, collecting leaf petioles for analysis for nutrient levels. Leaf removal, again, for shading is critical. Once we start to have color change, you want to get your bird netting up. Birds will see that and they'll start to come in. I can't overemphasize how turkeys love those grapes. As they start to change color, they'll come in and eat them right off the cluster. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe the amount of damage in less than a week that occurred in our trials. Check the nets several weeks ahead to make sure that the condition. You may want to remove tendrils on the top wire before applying netting, so it helps out in putting it on so it doesn't get tangled in the tendrils in the netting. Again, for bunch rots, if they're a problem, you want to maybe look at applying the fungicides for that. Get ready, prepare for harvest. Make sure you have all the boxes that you need, or make sure you have labor lined up for that harvest time. August may need to do a little bit of irrigating, especially here in New Hampshire. In 2016, we had less than ½ inch for the whole month, but we want to start to taper off our watering at the end of the month so we can get the vines start to harden off. Again, leaf removal, plucking around our shoots, making sure the clusters are open to that sunlight. We might be doing, again, another round of shoot topping or skirting. We're checking maturity, testing sugar, flavor, acidity. We might even start to harvest our earlier cultivars at the end of August, depending on the year. We're keeping our row middles mowed. Signs for anthracnose can be starting to be seen at this time. Again, we're continuing training our plants and controlling the weeds. I'm looking at that bunch of grapes for spotted wing Drosophila eggs. We had last year a real bad case of bees and hornets going after our grapes. We were in such a bad drought here. Bees and hornets were literally going to the grapes, ripping them open for the moisture in the grapes. Lost some varieties upwards of 50 to 60% due to damage by bees and hornets. Both domestic and wild pollinizers were doing that. September, continuing our maturity, harvesting of the grapes ripens, continue our disease management strategies. We're going to irrigate if needed. Like to be by end of September, no longer irrigating, checking our disease, insect recommendations, start to clean our equipment, clean our planting up. New plantings established for next year, make sure the ground is prepared, weed-free, plant a cover crop like oats, which will winter kill to hold this soil in place for over the winter. October, November, we want to remove any diseased fruit from our vineyard, to go through, check it out, clean it up. Also, some weeds that might get through, we might want to remove them at that time. Repair equipment, look at our disease recommendations from our NOAA station. They do have different programs in there that will suggest times for spraying or checking for different insect and diseases. We start to plan for next year's planting, make sure we have our plants or vines ordered for next year, and go from there. Okay, to end, I want to just go back at crop control and canopy management. To our crop control is a practice that includes physical adjustment of the vine to balance our growth of fruit with the growth of foliage. This practice is trying to make sure there's sufficient growth on each vine to mature the fruit that we're leaving. We don't want to overtake too much of the shoots or leaves, so that we can develop the sugar contents in those leaves that will be translocated, so it's a balancing act. With that, we have different practices, and one is what we call shoot thinning or suckering. We usually are doing this on our trunks and our cordons to make sure that unwanted shoot growth on the trunk or cordon is removed. This is best done earlier in the season when they're 1 or 3 inches long. They're easy to just snap off. You don't have to cut. A 16, when we're looking at our cordon, usually leave them go a bit longer, 6 to 12 inches, and decide what shoots we're going to be leaving at that time. We like to space the shoots along the cordon, have a density of 4 to 6 shoots per foot of cordon or canopy. So that's shoot thinning, or on our trunks, what we call suckering. Positioning is basically looking at, if it's a vertical growing, placing them either up or down depending on our training system. Combing is usually what we're talking about when we're positioning trailing type grapes that are going in a downward position. Tucking is what we usually refer to upright growth vines, and using a lower training system of vertical shoot positioning, and the shoots are going to be held together by 2 or 3 pairs of movable catch wires that are spaced 10 to 12. So we're basically tucking them in between those catch wires, trying to keep them going more of an upright position. It's a lot of work. Now, sometimes we're doing both tucking and combing at the same time. So on some systems, sometimes we have a training system that we're training part of the canopy in an upright growth and a part of it on a downward growth. There's a couple different ones. I'm not going to name them right now, so that we're doing both of them at the same times. Now, cluster thinning must be done on some varieties that might produce 4 or 5 clusters, but they will be smaller. By removing 1 or 2, so we have 2 or 3 clusters remaining, those clusters will fill in better and have a much larger, more attractive cluster for the consumer. So you've got to make a determination if you're going to do it. There's usually 2 periods of time. One is prior to bloom, when the blossoms are coming out there the second or third week in June, and going and pruning off the first or maybe the last two on it and leaving the two, the second, third cluster. The other time that we tend to go to is the post-bloom thinning, is as we see the clusters bloom, the fruitlets are starting to develop, the berries are developing, and then we are going to prune them off, those clusters, to the best looking clusters at that time. This method ensures our yield, helps with sugar, vine size, and some of the hardiness. The next practice is what I call leaf removal or pulling, plucking. And we're doing this to improve the air movement and also allows better spray penetration around those clusters, especially with a bunch rot infections. The second reason we're doing it is to improve sunlight for the exposure to the fruit and also the basal buds for them to harden off properly. This can also help ward off some disease problems by opening them up, leaving less humidity around those grapes. It will sometimes help with our disease problems. Now, the last practice is what we call shoot hedging or skirting. And again, I mentioned it before, for upward growing, what we're going to do is hedge, cut at the top, usually at the top wire or above the top wire. You can see down the row how nice they are, that somebody has gone through and hedged them real good and has tucked them real good. But the forefront, you can see some of the canes that were not tucked in properly, so you don't see those shoots upright growing, so you don't know really what to cut off. So that's why sometimes the tucking is important, so that we know where to hedge. Now, the downward position, if they're going downward, especially on a Geneva double curtain, the Munson system that we were talking about, we're going to do skirting, cutting those trailing type growing cultivars so that they're not touching the ground. Now, if this was a trailing type, you can see that between the first and second vine there's a shoot going downward. We'd be cutting that off around a foot off the ground. So those are some of the practices that we need to do during the summer to manage our canopy to our crop load. I want to thank Becky Seidman, our specialist here at UNH, as our vegetable and small fruit specialist. John Mustokas, where I did the grape variety trial. I've worked with Dave Quigley. He reviewed the presentation, and also John Temchek at one of the wineries to see if I was hitting all the points today that I thought was important, and kind of critiqued where I was going. So that's my presentation, an hour and 85 minutes. That's what you told me, Laura. I think
Perfect.
I hit it right on. So that's where we're at.
All right, George, thank you. Take a breath. That was really great. We had a lot of questions, primarily just little, kind of pruning information about where to go to get these demos. And I'm going to encourage people, if you have specific questions about where pruning demonstrations might be located, send me an email. I'll try to find something that's appropriate to your location. There are not a lot of these, I'll be honest with you. George does more work than anybody else in New England, and we do have some, we have a relatively small but growing wine grape industry in Eastern New York. So there are some opportunities, but there's not a lot. So I just want you folks to realize that it may be a little bit of a drive to get there, but I will try to get you that information if you email me your contact information and your location.
Okay, I know in Massachusetts, Sonia Sloman does a pruning demonstration usually every year. I do 2 in New Hampshire. Dave Hanley up in Maine is also talking about it. So in New England, there are a couple other states that are doing them. I've done one at one site for 25 of the farm. They said, will you go prune our grapes? And after the second year, I said, if I'm going to prune them, it's going to be a meeting. So 25 years, we've had people coming from snowstorms to rainstorms to 70-degree days, the first Friday in April in Hollis. So.
All right, great. Thanks, George. Before we sign off, I just want to give everybody one more chance. If you've got a question, a burning question, please ask it, either chat it, or you could try to unmute your mic and just ask the question. Just see if anybody takes advantage of that.
I know Jim mentioned on one of his, a lot of our pruning is similar for table grapes than it is with wine grapes. To me, the biggest difference is our summer management, because we're looking to make sure those clusters are being developed so that of a beautiful cluster of grapes, where wine grapes, I could care less what it looks like, just so it tastes good in that bottle of wine. So it's a little bit different mindset with the grower in producing table grape versus a wine grape.
All right, good clarification. Thank you everybody for joining us. I will send, again, I'll send you the recording link and any other information that we get from our next week's speakers along. George, thank you so much. It went beautifully, and I really appreciate your time and energy.
Tally ho, thank you.
All right, have a great weekend, everyone.